Hey guys, it's Zuri and welcome to my couch.
Boing boing.
Today is the first episode of Bad Movie Club, a new segment on my channel where I review movies that have received low ratings and talk about why I think that is. Disclaimer, no harm is meant by covering this movie on a segment entitled Bad Movie Club. Frankly, Bad Movie Club sounds better than low-rated movie club, but I understand that all art is subjective and that even though a movie receives low ratings, there's still something that we can take away from it, either from an educational standpoint or from an entertainment standpoint or a moral standpoint, whatever. There's always something to be learned. So today's movie is called Infinite, which was released to streaming service Paramount Plus a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure of the exact date. And as of right now, it has ratings of 5.3 out of 10 on IMDb, 16% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 38% from the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and 28% on Metacritic. So before we get into what this movie is about, the cast includes Mark Wahlberg, Dylan O'Brien, Sophie Cookson, Chiwetel Ejiofor, as well as some other popular names. Okay, so what is this movie about? Infinite is about a man named Evan Macaulay who is diagnosed with schizophrenia because he experiences what is assumed to be hallucinations. However, it turns out that these hallucinations are actually visions of past lives that he really lived. He comes to learn that he is an infinite, someone who has been reincarnated several times and can not only regain their memories, but can also retain the skills they learned in past lives. Evan is taken in by an infinite named Nora and a group of other infinites called the Believers, because they believe that the skills and talents they learned in their past lives are a gift that they can use in their current lives to better the world they live in. They also think that Evan is the reincarnation of a man named Treadway, who is very important because he holds the key to the end of the world. Basically, Treadway has a friend turned nemesis called Bathurst, who is an infinite belonging to a group called the Nihilists, because they feel, in contrast to the Believers, that their gift of reincarnation is a curse that must be stopped. Bathurst created a device to end the world called the Egg, and Treadway is the only one who knows where it is. So the movie follows Evan, who is Treadway, trying to remember where he placed the egg so that they can defeat Bathurst and the Nihilists. So my review of this movie will contain spoilers from this point forward, so if after hearing the description and seeing the cast and seeing everything, you feel like you're interested in this movie, I suggest you stop watching this video, go watch it, and then come back so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about and you won't be spoiled by anything. So, even though there were mainly bad reviews for this movie, there were a couple positive reviews basically saying, hey, this is an action movie. It's meant to be mindless fun. That's what I was expecting and that's what I got, which is a pretty valid critique. And other positive reviews praise the acting and the writing, but unfortunately, the majority of the reviews weren't very positive, both from critics and from general audience members. And they were criticizing the plot very severely, and I think I know why. But before we get into that, I did see one review, there might have been more, but I only saw one, criticizing the fact that Evan was diagnosed with schizophrenia because the doctors interpreted the things that he was remembering from his past lives as hallucinations. So basically, the reviewer was feeling like mental health was downplayed by doing this, and like fictionalizing mental illness by saying, you know, it wasn't hallucinations, it was actually a recollection of real events, which I also think is a valid criticism because oftentimes mental health is trivialized, misrepresented, or just plain overlooked in movies and other works of fiction. And like I said, it's possible that other people felt uncomfortable with this or didn't like this, but I only saw one review mention it. So it's quite possible that this aspect of the movie was overlooked in general by the audience, unfortunately. Most of the reviews just focused on how bad they felt the storytelling was, and as I mentioned before, I think I know why the storytelling didn't come across as very strong. Infinite is actually the movie adaptation of a book called The Reincarnationist Papers by D. Eric Maykrantz. And I can safely assume that most, if not all, the people that watched the movie didn't even know it was based off of a book. Because if people had read the book and then watched the movie, their criticisms would be based off of how well the movie represented the book. But nobody mentioned that, so I'm just going to assume that most people didn't even know it was a book adaptation, and the people that did know it was a book adaptation probably didn't read the book, including myself. I didn't read the book, so I don't know how good or how bad the movie represented the contents. Now, I don't personally think that one should have to read the book to understand the movie, because the movie should be able to stand on its own. You should be able to watch it and enjoy it as if the book doesn't even exist. Sure, it should spark interest in the original work, and it should make the audience want to read the books for more info, but if you have to read the books to understand very important information in the movie, like you won't understand the movie unless you read the book first, I feel like that's a bit of a problem. I did have a sneaking suspicion, though, that the movie was based off of a book. Just because the world that Evan is introduced to when he is taken in by the believers is so intricate. It just gave me book vibes. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, it just felt like somebody had written a very detailed 300+ page work about this world. Like, I don't know how else to explain it other than that. We met quite a few characters that we never really get to know. It just felt like nods to book characters that we would recognize had we read the book. We would be like, oh my goodness, it's this person. Oh my goodness, it's that person. But because we haven't read the books, we don't really have that reaction. It's just one more character that is being introduced to us for the first time. And also, we find out near the end that Garrick, who is the head of technology and research at the Believers headquarters, had a relationship with the main villain, Bathurst, in a past life or something, which again just feels like something that was added because it was important in the books. But it was never alluded to at any point other than when it's mentioned in the movie, and it just feels like almost like it wouldn't have mattered. Like, sure, it adds a layer of complexity to things, but in relation to the actual plot, it doesn't really add anything to the plot. It just adds more meat to the overall world, I guess, if that makes sense. Don't get me wrong, though. I know that not every side character can be explored in depth without the movie feeling too all over the place. But I'm just pointing these couple things out to show just how detailed things are and why it just gave me book vibes. Like, movies that aren't book adaptations can also be very detailed. But I don't know, there's just something about a movie that is based off of a book that just feels different to me personally. Ultimately, I think that if Infinite was a series instead of a standalone movie, it would do so much better and have a better impression on people, because then you can really dive into the world and the characters. In a book, you can explain whatever you need to explain in a page or so of text, but in a movie you have to show things, and sometimes showing something doesn't give you all the context needed in certain cases. Like, you could always explain using narration or dialogue, but if that's overused, you can easily lose people, because movies are very visual. You want to see things actually happening. If you use excessive narration or excessive dialogue to explain things, then it kind of loses the flow and loses the visual element of the movie. So I feel like if we had gotten 20 to 25 episodes, each ranging between half an hour and 45 minutes long, exploring everything that the movie explored, it would have gone over so much better. Because in the first episode, we might have gotten way more detail on Evan's backstory and what his current life has been like. And then in the second episode, we would have gotten, him being introduced, or maybe in the first episode it would have been him being introduced to the Believers or whatever. But I just feel like we would have been able to take in our time, kind of slow things down, and really dive into the world. Because I feel like because everything was so rushed, it felt nonsensical to people. Because the believers really seem like a tight-knit group of friends that have a lot of history with each other, and like there's a lot of things there. There's a lot of like substance there, but we don't really get a lot of that. We get a little glimpse here and there, but we don't really get too much of that, which again, it's a movie, so not everything can be explored. But I feel like with this, a lot needed to be explored in order for it to feel like a whole story was being told, and in order for the audience to feel more attached to the characters. Okay, so now I've explained my opinions on why I think people didn't like this movie, as well as kind of looked at the main complaints people have. So now I'm going to get into like things that didn't make sense for me, or my like just things relevant to the plot that stood out to me. And again, this is where we really get into spoilers. Also, trigger warning for my first point, it will include self-harm. So if you don't want to hear about it, please skip to this time so that you don't have to hear about it. So the first thing that, stood out to me is the big twist in the movie. So the big twist in the movie is that Evan/Treadway hid the egg inside of him the entire time. So he has the key to the end of the world inside his body, which would be the corpse of the body that he inhabited in his last life. So before we get into how he did this, which kind of, it's been keeping me up at night, I just want to talk about like the reveal, which I feel like was a bit obvious. I don't know, because we see that Treadway has a cut in the side of his stomach at the beginning of the movie, and then he tells one of the other infinites that if he fails, look inside. And we find out that in his next life as Evan, he cut the words "look inside" into his chest as a kid. So they were planting some not so subtle clues. Like I was like, is it just gonna be inside of him? Like, I don't know. I was kind of like, how subtle is that? It's pretty obvious, I think. I don't know. I feel like if you say it's obvious, but people were like, I didn't get that. Like nobody said that the big twist was obvious. Everyone was just like, nothing made sense. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that was pretty obvious. But anyhow, the way that Treadway hid the egg inside of himself has been haunting me, as I said. So at first, right, I thought that they were trying to insinuate that he basically performed surgery on himself by placing the egg inside of himself via an incision during a high-speed chase. Like while driving, he cuts himself and puts the egg inside, and then proceeds to jump out of his car as it goes off of the highway, grabs onto a crane, pulls himself up onto the crane, and then fight Bathurst, all with an open wound. That's what I originally thought, but no. It turns out that he did all of that, but it wasn't with an open wound, because he used this, like, not magical, but like a healing technology stick to speed up the closing of the wound. So he wasn't fighting with an open wound. He was fighting with a closed wound, but he still made it into himself while driving. Like he was like actually like steering with his knee. Which, again, it's an action movie. So I feel like you can really like shield, parts of the plot that don't make sense under the guise. If it's an action movie, it's, suspend your disbelief and have fun. That's what one of the review said. Just suspend your disbelief, it's fine. Which I feel like, I feel like every movie, even the ones that are more over the top and ridiculous, even they have rules. And again, I feel like the technology of this world isn't really explained, which again, you can't explain everything in an hour and a half or whatever. So that's why I feel like it would have done better as a series. We kind of just believe, okay, we just kind of are like, everything is high tech. Everything is just super high tech. There's no need to really go into stuff. So the next question that I have is, do all infinites have powers? Because Treadway has powers that Evan eventually remembers how to activate. And according to Garrick, Treadway can manipulate the energy of the world around him. And when I rewatched this part, it basically sounds like Treadway pushed himself to have those abilities, so he wasn't born with these abilities into each body. He just pushed himself to achieve these abilities. Can every Infinite do that? Can every Infinite access these powers? Or is he just a special Infinite? And then Bathurst is also maybe a special Infinite because he explains that he gets all of his memories back as his brain forms in the womb. So he's just a fetus with a fully developed brain / memory, because all the other Infinites get their memories back like over time, like when they're a kid, like during puberty, I think is how Nora explains it. For him to get all of his memories back as his brain is forming is just so, again, it's terrifying but also funny, because he's being born with all of the knowledge that he's accumulated throughout all of his lives. So centuries upon centuries, he knows everything upon being born. Imagine giving birth to a baby that automatically knows everything there is to know about humanity, and knows that no matter what happens, like, humanity just repeats themselves over and over and over again, time and time again. Like, that is, no wonder he wants to just destroy humanity. But yeah, my question is, why is Bathurst different? Why is he and Treadway both so different? Like, what's going on there? Again, it's not explained in the movie. I feel like we probably get an explanation in the books, but it's definitely something that I'm curious about. And on this subject of Bathurst, a couple reviews mentioned this next point, which I didn't even think about until they mentioned it, and it's pretty valid to talk about. So Bathurst, in addition to creating the egg that will destroy the Earth, created something called the Dethroner, which will basically put the soul of an Infinite into a computer chip, thus stopping them from reincarnating. So the question that people had was, if he created this Dethroner thing that will stop the Infinites from reincarnating, which will stop what he considers to be a curse, why didn't he just dethrone himself, putting his own soul into a computer chip instead of trying to destroy the entire world? Well, one could argue that the problem for him isn't that he hates life. Like, it's not that he hates life and that it's a problem for him to overcome, either by getting over it and living a fulfilling life or dethroning himself, but rather the problem is that he believes that nothing should exist, and that it's his duty, his calling, to end all life because he doesn't think that anything should exist. Like the believers believe they should be helping humanity, he believes that he should be destroying humanity. Because again, if he understands that no matter what happens, human beings are always awful, killing each other, doing all this stuff, because he's lived so many lives, if he just sees the same thing over and over again, of course he's going to believe that, you know, nothing should exist. But then again, I think someone mentions, Garrick mentions in the movie, that Treadway has, like, experienced the same, like, him and Treadway have been around for the same amount of time. Like, they used to be friends, and they've lived all these lives together. So again, it's not explained why Bathurst decides everyone should die and Treadway doesn't. Garrick says that Bathurst lost faith, but it's never explored any further. Bathurst is a part of the Nihilist subgroup of Infinites, which I don't know anything about nihilism other than what I had to read for this video. So I just want to put that out there. But something that I realized, which is interesting, is that, okay, according to Google, nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles and the belief that life is meaningless. And also, it's a philosophy or family of views within philosophy expressing negation towards general aspects of life that are widely accepted within humanity as objectively real, such as knowledge, existence, and the meaning of life. And according to what I looked into, nihilists generally don't believe in God or any type of higher power. However, Bathurst wonders aloud to his right-hand woman if God will allow them to destroy all life. And he also demands at one point that God shows him his face. He was like, God must show me his face, or something along those lines. He doesn't specify what his religious or spiritual beliefs are, but clearly he believes in a higher power, which is in contrast to what nihilists believe, according to Google. So maybe in the infinite world, nihilism isn't a philosophy, but like the nihilists, it's just like a name for the group, if that makes sense. So it's not a philosophy, but just a name for the group of infinites that want to destroy the world. Because his views kind of contrast with the philosophy. So I don't know, but that's just my kind of conclusion, but I could be wrong, I don't know. And by no means do I mean to misrepresent or oversimplify nihilism. Again, I just googled it to get a better understanding of Bathurst as a character. I don't know anything outside of what I looked up. Okay, so again, another point of confusion of mine involves Bathurst. So, Garrick, she shows Evan a version of Bathurst in a past life. And Evan recognizes him because Evan met Bathurst in the current life before. So it's either that Bathurst's past self looks like his current self, which wouldn't make sense, or Garrick put a current image of Bathurst's face over old Bathurst's face to make things clear for Evan. Like she just put a current image of him on top of the old so that he would understand that, hey, this is the same guy. The guy that spoke to you earlier, yeah, he's the bad guy. Maybe that's what happened, but it's never really explained. It's still unclear. Because the whole point is that you reincarnate into a new body. So why would Bathurst from a past life look like current Bathurst? So the next point that I have is about Treadway and Evan. So Evan is just Treadway reincarnated. They're the same soul. It's just he is now in Evan's body. But sometimes when referring to Treadway, the characters talk about him as if he's a different person, which in a way he kind of is, because he was in a different body, so he had different experiences. And, another character even says that he was meaner in the last life and that Evan has more humor. So this point brings up a lot of existential questions, how do we become who we are? So does Treadway become Treadway when he remembers that he's Treadway? Because our memories do impact how we act and how we behave and how we treat people, right? And we see at the end when Evan gets reincarnated again, he is a boy, and we see him when he's born, and we see when he's around 14 or 15. He seems to pretty much remember who he is by that point and what he's meant to do. And he also has the same kind of, heroic fighter attitude that Treadway seemed to have, like Treadway before he was Evan seemed to have. So it's kind of interesting to think of when does Treadway become Treadway, and Treadway was Evan when he didn't remember that he was Treadway. It's pretty interesting, and I don't know if this is a confusing concept, but it's interesting to think about when he becomes himself in a way versus being the person that everyone assumes he is because he was in the body of somebody. So the last kind of point of confusion I have is, what are the rules of reincarnation? Because we see glimpses of who Evan, Nora, and Bathurst used to be. And while they all appear to be different races at different times, they always seem to be the same gender. But I can't really say that because not all of their past lives were explored. And it seems as though, even though the gender remains the same, the race changes, and we don't really hear about them being plants or animals at all. I'm just gonna assume in the Infinite world that reincarnation for the Infinites are limited to just human beings. So in regards to the race thing, I saw someone comment that because Evan/Treadway was a Japanese sword maker in another life, they were basically whitewashing the character by making Evan white in the current life when he should or could be Asian. Treadway was also white before he was reincarnated into Evan's body, and then at the end he is reincarnated as an Asian boy. I'm not Asian, so I can't say whether this kind of race fluidity is offensive or not. I'm just trying to outline like how race is treated in the movie, and the person that commented this said that, you know, they understand that reincarnation in general and in this movie has no racial bounds, but it just kind of rubbed them the wrong way, which is understandable, and I'm not here to say that it's not offensive or it is offensive because I can't comment on it. But I just think that it's interesting to note, like, would it have gone over better if they could only be reincarnated as the same race, or does it not matter? I guess I don't really know, but I just think that is an interesting point to mention. And why is it that, you know, gender is constant but race isn't? Or if we were to do it the other way, why would it be that, you know, race is constant but everything else isn't? Like, I don't know. I guess maybe it's the backstory about the reincarnation isn't really delved into, and what makes one person an infinite and one person not an infinite? Are the infinites a race onto their own? They're just their own type of human. Like, I don't know. Like, there's so many different ways that this could go. So if I were to rate this movie, well, I guess I can rate this movie, I give this movie a 3 out of 5 stars. Like, a lot of people really hated this movie. Like, looking at the comments, like, it was really, like, people had awful things to say, quite frankly. And I am pretty easy to please when it comes to movies. Unless you're doing something just really, really outright terrible in terms of, like, cinematography, production, or the plot really is just not nonsensical. Like, people said this plot was nonsensical. I could follow this plot. That's just me, though. I'm pretty easy to please when it comes to movies. So if you've come to Bad Movie Club expecting me to, you know, rip into movies, I'm fairly easy to please. So that's not what we're getting here, really. So what have we learned from Infinite? That in certain cases, adapting a book to film is hard. Not to say that it can't be done. Not to say that every time you adapt a book into a movie, it should be in a series. I'm not saying that. But it is worth thinking about, worth looking into. I don't know if doing a series is more expensive than doing a film or what have you. But I do think that it would have gone over better for people. Like, people would have received it a lot better if it was a series. But that's just my opinion. I think if they want to do a sequel, they should just make it a series. You know, oftentimes you have a movie and then you have a spin-off series. Just do a spin-off series, okay? Just follow Treadway reincarnate. I'm not sure what the boy's, like, name is in this, because, like, I guess they would give him a name because they don't know that he's Treadway, like his parents. We don't know his name, like his regular life name, but his reincarnate name, let's say, is Treadway. So the spin-off series would follow Treadway, and, you know, Nora also reincarnated, and her boyfriend Abel also reincarnated. So it would just be following those characters and Artisan, and, you know, it would be fun. I would watch that. Because another thing that I noticed, someone said that the premise felt very young adult. Like, it felt very like the premise was something that you would normally see happen to teenagers or young adults, but instead the main cast of characters were adults, you know? So it's interesting that all of the main characters, except for a couple, were reincarnated as young people, like 13, 14, teenagers, really. So it would be interesting if the story really followed them as teenagers. You know, that'd be pretty cool. Also, question about the very end. Bathurst. Does he get dethroned? Because Evan shoots him with a dethroner. So, like, is he done? Because I failed to see. Bathurst is not a real villain if he doesn't come back for a vengeance. Like, they make us think he died, but he didn't. So, if Infinite has a sequel, I will probably watch it just to see how things develop. And I might read the books, depending. I might. So yeah, all in all, I didn't hate the movie. As I said, 3 out of 5 stars. I can understand why people don't like it, but personally, it's not the worst movie I have ever seen. So, let me know what you think about this movie in the comment section down below. You can also suggest any other low-rated movies for me to review and then we discuss. Like, talk to me in the comments. Let me know what you thought. You can check out my other videos to see me talk about fictional characters. That's just kind of what I do here. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye!